Hello, and welcome back to American Motherhood, where we explore how politics and society shape motherhood in America. My name is Bethany, and I'm a liberal mom of two in Central Ohio. I'm on a mission to bridge the divide between liberal and conservative moms through real and productive conversation. But I can't do it alone. I'm looking for thoughtful conservative moms to join the podcast. If that sounds like you or someone you might know, email me at americanmotherhood@gmail.com. While that search continues, I'm excited to get into our local election series where I've been speaking with candidates for Westerville City Council and School Board to help make this election more accessible to you. Today I'm joined by Kristy Meyer, mom of two, entrepreneur, fierce advocate, and current school board president. She is seeking re-election this November, and we talk about her campaign, school board responsibilities, and how recent challenges and successes have shaped our district. I learned a lot from this conversation, and I think you will too. Two quick notes. Kristy offered a correction to her comments on funding the gym projects at Mark Twain and Robert Frost. The district used permanent improvement funds previously allocated to the project rather than general revenue funds or bond money, as you'll hear later on. And secondly, this episode was recorded before the board voted on July 21st to place a 0.75% earned income tax levy on the November ballot. That's now official, and Kristy shares helpful insight into why those funds are needed. Now, let's get to the conversation. And if you enjoy what you hear, please subscribe, leave a review, or share American Motherhood with a friend. Kristy, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me and to share your campaign and your dreams for Westerville City Schools with our listeners. If you could start just by telling us about yourself.
Sure. First, thank you for asking me to join you. I'm really excited about this opportunity, so thank you again. So I grew up in this district, right? I learned my ABCs at Hawthorne. I went to Emerson for first and second grade. It wasn't a magnet school or gifted program at that time. So I was in Blendon Township until I was about 7, I think. And then we moved over to Spring Grove. So that took me over to Robert Frost for third through sixth. And then I had the pleasure of walking maybe one block to Walnut Springs for seventh and eighth.
Nice.
And then graduated from Westerville North. So at Westerville North, I was on drill team. We were national kickline champions, which was awesome.
Yeah.
I myself took dance for over a decade at Straub. So I did jazz and point and ballet. And I have two siblings. I'm the oldest of three, so I have my sister who also lives in the district. She lives just about 2 blocks away from me. I actually live in Blendon Township right now. My brother lived in Blacklick, so still very much in the area. My parents still live in Spring Grove, Ronald and Eileen Shambrom. So we're very much grounded in this district. My sister has 4 kids that all go to Central. One just graduated from Central and will be heading off to Hiram, so I'm really proud of him. And then my daughter is a rising senior at South because she's up in the IB program. And my son he's a rising freshman, so he'll be going to Central. So we're a divided house here in terms of where we've graduated from, but it's all good. And so very much grounded in this district. In fact, my husband and I, when we had our daughter, she was 8 months old, we moved back specifically for the school district. So very much grounded in Westerville. My career, my professional life I do environmental policy. So I've done that for over 20 years. I worked at the Ohio Environmental Council for 15 years, growing our water and land programming there. So when I left there, I was the vice president of policy. Headed over to Freshwater Future, which is a Great Lakes region-wide nonprofit, working with grassroots organizations on water issues. So I used to be on their board, and then I ended up being a staff member, associate director, helping like I said, grassroots organizations really hone in on their water policy campaigns. That happened right before COVID, so everyone switched gears, and I worked with the Great Lakes states to keep water on when people couldn't afford their water bill. and then decided to maybe give working with businesses a shot on sustainability and headed over to Smart Columbus for a couple of years, working with them on renewable energy and electric vehicles. And then just really missed working with policy and legislators. And I know not many people would probably say that, but I did, and used an opportunity that landed in my lap to come back into this space and create my own consulting company. So in April of 2023, I quit my job at Smart Columbus with 2 contracts working with mission-driven organizations on environmental policy.
Wow. That is amazing. And I hope that in a separate podcast episode, we can really dig into that work
Yeah.
because that is so important and leaves such a great impact. That's wonderful. So, at what point did you start thinking to yourself, "Oh, I really want to get on the school board"?
So in 2018, I was kind of transitioning, trying to think about my next step when I was at the Ohio Environmental Council. And here I am moving over to Freshwater Future. It's a Great Lakes region-wide nonprofit, and I really was interested in a couple of things. One, giving back to my community. That really has given so much to me and my family.
Mhm.
And two, whenever I look at, sometimes I'll do a check in with myself about what is it that I'm really still passionate about. And it's always the environment, women's issues, and kids.
Mhm.
And so I've, kind of tackling the environmental issues in my professional life and how it impacts all of us, really, not just women and kids. But, my own kids are in the district, four of my 6 nieces and nephews. And public education is so fundamental, and I'm a product of it as well. It's the great equalizer, and it really is the foundation of a good, thriving, healthy community. And I was like, I think I'd be really interested in being on the school board. So I talked at the time, I was exiting the Ohio Environmental Council and talked to our board president, Rich Shank, who happened to be related to Tracy Davidson. And so he was like, oh, you should talk to Tracy Davidson. So I met with her and I met with other school board members. And just started asking some questions. And at that same time, I was also really involved in my kids' elementary school at Wilder and, talking to the Westerville Education Foundation executive director at that time about some of the DEI projects that they were doing. And they also had an environmental pillar. And so it kind of really um, gave me more passion to want to jump in and be on the
Yeah.
board.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Okay, I want to take a step back and talk about the responsibility for the school board because um, when you do a quick Google search, what I find is that school boards are responsible for overseeing public education within their district, acting as the governance team, setting policy, and ensuring the district operates effectively. They hire and evaluate the superintendent and treasurer, who are responsible for the day to day operations and financial management of the district. They oversee the budget and they represent the community's voice in education. Is that reflective of Westerville School Board? And what else is there?
Well, it's actually a really good description of how boards of education should be operating. And I would say that is reflective of the Westerville City School District. As a board member, and I'm just one of 5, remember. So
Mhm.
it's not like I can make a unilateral decision. I'm bringing what I'm hearing from community members to what I'll call district leadership. So that's my other board members, and as you said, the treasurer and the superintendent. And we're talking through, what does that impact look like? Is that an issue? Do we need to set policy, or is there something that we need to do, or is that just information we should know? Um, and then, uh, particular issues might come up that we may need to just set some policy or maybe change how we're doing something to make sure that everybody is on the same page. So maybe it's a communication thing that we need to get out, right? So it's really about the high level, setting the direction, policy, making sure that we're in compliance with the state and federal laws, and making sure that we have the resources to be able to implement the things that we want to do. The day-to-day work, that is not where board members should be, for sure.
Okay. Oh, okay, that's helpful.
I might also add, you work with the superintendent and the treasurer to set goals for themselves over the year, but we also evaluate them too, right? And so making sure that we're investing in them as well so that they can also invest in their staff too.
Okay, that's great. And how else, if at all, does the board work in conjunction with the school administrators? Or is it simply just closely with the superintendent and treasurer?
So, there's a leadership team that is like, I would say, the superintendent, the treasurer, and then the chiefs. And so there's three chiefs. And really, it's a two-way communication, I think. We're bringing things that we're hearing from the community and also our own perspective as parents in the district too. And they're bringing information that they're hearing from in the district staff, from other maybe parents, and they themselves are parents too. So we bring these things to each other and like, how do we work through them? Right. And so something that's actually been on my mind today, because we just had a board staff retreat, is communication, right? We have good communication, but how can we continue to improve? And so we worked together today to kind of dig through a first couple of layers of communication, board to board member, board to district leadership. So, those types of things.
Okay, one more question about the overarching board. I'm going to refer to this as the mission of the board. I'm not sure if that's what you guys refer to it as, but right on the website, this is what it says. The Westerville City School Board of Education endeavors to provide all students maximum educational opportunities within the constraints of available facilities, financial resources, legal requirements, and citizen involvement. It is the board's responsibility to encourage the development of each student's ability to contribute in a democratic, free, enterprise, and technological society. To this end, the board believes that the basic purposes of the public schools are to help each student grow in the knowledge and acceptance of self, help each student develop an appreciation for personal worth so that they may develop individual talent and ability, and help each student develop the knowledge and ability to share his or her talents with others. So first, I just want to reflect and say, like, those are powerful words, and I really believe in all of those missions. But I'm curious how often that is reevaluated and who determines and publishes this mission. Is this with each new term or every 4 years, or how does that work? Or has this been established for quite some time?
This mission has been in place for a while, and this is the essence of the conversations that we're having. We're constantly centering students and trying to figure out how we can unlock each and every opportunity for them, meeting them where they're at with the resources and the constraints, as you talked about, that we have.
Mm-hmm. So tell us, how would you describe your time on the board these past 4 years?
I would say one of gratitude and growth. Um, I'm a product of public education, and I'm a parent of students in the district. So you kind of feel like, oh, I think I know a lot. But when you get in, you're like, whoa, I didn't realize how big the system is, how it works. And just an immense gratitude for each and every staff member in the district that shows up daily and, puts aside whatever their personal things are to really hone in on our kids, our students, our next generation, and pour themselves into them. Whether they may need to, these are people that may need to go to the bathroom. They may be having a bad day themselves, right? They may have something tragic that happened, and they put all that aside to maybe hold a kid's hand or sit down and listen. So just immense gratitude for understanding this very big system and how it works. And I would say, for myself, when I first came in, I was like, oh, okay, well, I have to know everything so that I can make sure I don't miss anything, but there's no way you can know it all. And so it's a constant growth opportunity to continue to ask questions, to listen to students and families and community members and staff, and really understand what's happening in the district, and really kind of reflecting on how can we make it better. So I'm just really thankful for the opportunity.
Yeah. Okay, so tell us a bit about your responsibilities specifically as board president. And do you guys appoint each other? Do you nominate? How does that work?
Yeah, so we do that yearly. We will appoint a president and a vice president. So in my second year, I was the vice president. And for the past 2 years, I've been the board president. And again, very grateful. A really great opportunity. The board president does a few things, right? They uh, represent the Board of Education in terms of signing contracts, um, working with the superintendent and the district. You're kind of that conduit to the community too. You set the agenda with the vice president and the superintendent and the treasurer, but then also kind of facilitate and protect board processes. And so what do I mean by that? Making sure that we're collaborative, and we're putting forward a collaborative governance model. You preside at all the meetings, but you also have these other engagements that you go to, like new teacher orientation or convocation, and you're giving speeches, right? Or maybe graduation, or attending, some partnership meeting in the community. There's also leadership meetings, board leadership meetings, where you're meeting with the superintendent and the treasurer, maybe a chief of, curriculum or operations or HR, or policy. And so there's a number of things that you are really responsible for. And then also, board development, making sure that we're holding each other accountable. So if someone's not showing up to the meetings on time, you get to talk to them, or making sure that we're lovingly holding each other accountable.
I like how you said that. So my understanding is that the board members are paid only for the time in the board meetings.
Yes.
Okay, so give us a sense of how much time actually goes into your role and your work on the board.
So if you were to do the bare minimum, right, and just prepared for the board meetings, I'd say probably on average about 10 hours a week. But I'm a firm believer in how we do all things. How we do one thing, we do all things. And so um, I spend a lot of time going to classrooms when invited. I try to make them all, but it's so incredibly hard. You could really you could make this a full-time job in just going to different events, but trying to make sure that I'm at, musicals and music concerts, sports events, celebrations. There's award nights, graduation. You're there the whole day. You're doing 3 graduations and shaking about 1,500 hands. So there's so many things that you attend as a board member. And you only get paid for those actual meetings that you hold. So this is really more of a volunteer position. And it's very rewarding, though, to be able to stand up and celebrate our students and their great accomplishments. But my favorite is graduation. The excitement, the celebration, the hope that's in the air, it's nothing like it. And that in itself is worth all of it.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, before I move on, I'm so curious if you hope to continue as president.
Oh, I really enjoy it, to be honest, because you're more in contact with, the superintendent and the treasurer, and you're constantly talking to each other. Not that we couldn't as a board member, but yeah, you're definitely working more together. Um, but I think also it's good to give other people opportunities too. And so, I would be honored if I was to be the board president again, but I'd also be okay with having some of my other colleagues, take on that role too.
Sure. So let's dig into your specific hopes for this next term. Um, First of all, I'll give a shout out to your website, KristyMeyer.com. And this is where everyone can see more about you and your priorities and commitments. And so I see student centered programs, safe and welcoming environments, meeting the needs of all children, and effective budgeting and spending. So let's dig into those a little bit more. And I'm curious to start how I think that there's a broad spectrum of a safe and welcoming environment. So, how would you reflect on our current stance and how we do that for our students and how can we improve?
So, I think there's a lot of layers to that. One, I think it's the building itself. Renovations need to happen at some of our buildings. And so we are working within our budget to be able to do that. Unfortunately, we did have a failing levy and a failing bond this past November. And so some of those building updates are kind of on hold. But I think some of the things so going to the physical structure itself, one of the things we were able to do is close off Mark Twain and Robert Frost gyms to, the rest of the building because they were open. And so we're required by law to open them to voting. And so during voting, parents rightfully were concerned about this open gym to the school. And so we were able to over this summer, be able to use bond money that we already had that was actually for this, right, to close off that closure or those areas. But when we talk about safe and inclusive buildings, making sure that our staff feel valued and seen so that they also can create, really loving and warm and inviting classrooms too and spaces. And so that when students walk in, they feel welcomed and seen and valued themselves. And I think that's a really important piece to when I think of a welcoming and safe environment. Am I walking into a place where I can be authentic and I can speak up when I need to and also, listen and learn. And I think it's really about supporting the people that are actually supporting the students. And that runs the gamut of all staff in a building.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking from the board, right, in your role there, how can you work to ensure that all students, regardless of race, ability, or background, are receiving an equitable education?
Well, I think that's really about meeting the student where they're at. And I know that we're doing a lot of work in that. Our new superintendent is really intentional about that. And I'm excited about that. And I know that a lot of the staff are too. But making sure that we're providing the resources that are needed to be able to meet that student where they're at. So you think about a lot of different things, right? So you have special education. So, we did a special education audit early on when I was on the board and making sure that we're really understanding the process that a parent and a family goes through and what are those extra supports that are needed to be put in place. Then I think about, English learners and making sure that we are able to provide the resources that are needed to help students learn English and feel that they are thriving in that as well. Making sure that if someone's struggling, that they're not struggling and not being noticed. What are the supports that are needed for the teachers and the staff to be able to support that student? And so I think it's really about making sure that we're meeting the students where they're at with what they need in their learning. And it's not the typical style that I think about when I was going to school. It was where we're being talked to. And so there's a lot more opportunity now of students working in pairs and teams and, hands-on opportunities. And I look at what we offer in our schools right now, and man, I'm like, I wonder what it would have been like if I was in school now. Such great opportunities, right? International Baccalaureate, AP, advanced, placement classes. You have college credit plus classes. You have world learners. You have pre-apprenticeships, career centers, all these pathways, and just really what I see is we work hard as a district to meet that student where they're at.
And one thing that I've um, been trying to learn more about too is our gifted programs for every grade level. Can you touch on that a little bit as well?
Well, yeah, so we have our contained gifted program, right, which my daughter went through. And then we have our gifted services within classrooms. And so that's where my son got his, is in the classroom. And so teachers, are working um, with students on all different levels of learning. And so they might be pairing up, particular students on one lesson so that they can, because they're at one particular level, right? Where they may be working with another group of students that are gifted, and they're working on a different piece of that, lesson, or getting a different instruction, but it's still within the guidelines of the curriculum. And so everyone is on the same page. They're all moving forward, but they're also getting the challenges that they need, which again goes to the credit of the teacher and the staff, right? Because back in the day, it was like you taught to the average student and you just hoped that they were getting challenged at home if they were gifted, or that you were getting additional support if you were, falling behind. And now it's really tailored. Like they're putting them in groups, they're working with them individually. And so I really give our staff a lot of credit for meeting students where they're at. And I know there's always more that we could be doing and more support that they could use. But again, we're operating in, in the fiscal restraints that we have. And I know that the staff are really resourceful and they're doing an amazing job with what we have at the moment.
It's a great segue. How do you approach budgeting decisions when our resources are limited, right?
Yeah, so really thinking about how can we impact students the least. And so that is real. And also, how do we continue to provide a very consistent education across the district? It doesn't mean that every building looks the same. Each building has some various culture to it, and that's great. But making sure that every student has some consistency across the district so they're all getting a high quality education. But really, it's just thinking about how is this going to impact the students and how can we do it in a way that will impact them the least.
And so, in a general sense, at what point did you gain a more complete understanding of the district's budget so that you could make more informed individual budgetary and financial decisions as needed throughout the year?
So I'll say, as even probably before you are fully sworn into your role on the board, the district reaches out and starts to put together these meetings with you so that you have a better understanding of the full district, including the budget. So Nicole sat down with Nicole Marshall. She went through the budget. We do it quite frequently too. She'll pull us in 2 by 2 because we can't be more than 3 in one meeting because of open public meeting laws. And, certainly we don't want to violate that. We want people to understand how decisions are being made, but we also need to have that information. So we'll sit down with her 1-on-1 or 2-on-2. And there is a lot of conversation. So we meet pretty, as needed, but also before the 5-year forecast and Also, I served on the finance committee for a little while too as a board liaison. And so that helps you really understand that budget as well. So, how I learn is more hands on too, right? So, it's always good for repetition. And certainly, I really learned quite a lot there and understanding how you how you make sure that everything's funded in this very big system, um, but also learned quite a bit during this process of failing our levy and our bond and also the state budget. So we had to make some, unfortunately, some cuts because we failed our levy and our bond, and really talking through, kind of those trade-offs and how could we make sure we're not impacting students, and then also how do we make sure we're not impacting our staff too, if that's possible, because you know those are real people with real lives, and so we were very thoughtful about how we did that, and I really credit my colleagues and the staff, in thinking through how we could do that the best possible way, and that was really through attrition. So understanding those pieces, I think, also helped really solidify all of this too. And then the state budget fight helped me even like dig into the weeds, what I would call way into the weeds, and understand how state funding impacts our budget too. Of course, you understand how much you're getting from the state and you know why and you know what it's going for, but I don't think you really get to understand the depth of like the impact until you're really way into the weeds. And the same for the federal, what we're seeing now, the freeze on the federal funding. And I really credit Nicole Marshall for this. She's constantly saying, even to the community, I'm happy to have any conversation about the budget. Come in at any, right? We'll sit down and we'll talk about it. And so I appreciate her willingness and ability to do that. And I don't know how many times I've probably had conversations with her on Sunday afternoons, like, help me understand this one more time. I know you explained it. So I think it's really early on. They do a lot, to make sure that you fully understand how the budget works.
So, switching gears a little bit, what are you most proud of accomplishing in your first term?
This was a stumper for me that I've been thinking about for quite a while, right? I think one of the things that I'm most proud about is that I've continued to really hold to the center is the students and making decisions that, based on the information that I have at the time that I have it, um, to ensure that our students are going to be able to continue to thrive in those instances. But if you wanted to get really specific, right, like mental health. When I first ran in 2021, I ran for a couple of reasons. I ran because I myself had struggled through the 504 process as a parent. And it was really eye opening and also really frustrating and sad. And the more I talked to parents about it, the more I realized I wasn't the only one that had this experience.
Mm-hmm.
I also ran because I noticed that guidance counselors were so important. So my daughter was at a school that shared a guidance counselor with another school at the time. And I remember she was struggling, and I said, make an appointment with your guidance counselor. And she said, I get to see her in 4 weeks. And I was like, well, that's not going to work, right?
Mm.
And also, I did a lot of work on my own, really training on social emotional intelligence and learning, and just really understood how important that is to help our kids learn social emotional programming early on, because I think not only will it help them in their academics, but that will help them in throughout their whole life. You think about you're working with team members and how you may be working with a difficult person and how do you regulate yourself, right? You think about the relationships you build. I can think of people in my own professional life that I worked with that were really challenging, but the ones that were really high, social, had a high IQ and social emotional intelligence were the people that I were always drawn to. And I've always said to my staff, you can hire someone and teach them the issue. So you can teach them about water quality. You can teach them about, policies, but you can't teach them these skills. And so some of the things that I was noticing was a real need to be able to teach our kids this at a very early age so that as they grow, they're not insecure when it comes to like middle school, right? There may still be some of that, but they're definitely much more secure and confident and resilient. Can you imagine a society like that? So that really moved me. And I'm so glad that we as a district are moving in that direction. We've done a lot of work there. We have some great programming, amazing staff that are thinking about this all the time. And I know we recently just picked some curriculum for elementary and moving in that direction. So I'm really proud of all of those things. We have guidance counselors at every building now, which I think is really important because I can't imagine telling a student, oh, I'll see you in 4 weeks. I'm sorry you have this problem today. And then also, this, like I said, special education. We did that special education audit, really looking at the process all the way through. And I've done a lot of work there. And then another reason why I ran was the diversity and equity inclusion. And I was involved in the diversity um, group at Wilder. But as I said earlier, was working with Westerville Education Foundation and was listening to some of those students that were talking about how some of the lessons plans were landing for them as a person of color in high school. And so was listening to our superintendent at the time talk about diversity and equity inclusion, and I really felt that we could be doing more. And so those are the things that I really got me motivated, just besides public education and wanting to give back to run. And I'm proud of the work that we've done in those areas. And then I'd also say, I'm really proud that we hired Angie Hamburg as our superintendent. She's really intentional about looking at the system and looking at how we can be more efficient and effective. And I've been really impressed in watching her move this big, massive ship that we have and getting all of that in line and just grateful for it.
That's a really great insight into what motivates you and how you want to continue to make a difference. What, on the flip side, maybe it was the same thing, maybe it was something different. What were some significant challenges that you've had these past 4 years serving on the board?
So, funding is a major challenge. I would say right now, public education is being attacked on every angle. And it's really, I would imagine, hard as a staff person in this field to continue to show up every day, right? But they do, and they pour their hearts into it. I think shortage of staff. And I don't just mean in the fact that we had to reduce staff. So we did that as much as we could through attrition of positions, which means more work lands on to other people's plates, right? And so I really want people to understand that those positions were important, but unfortunately the levy failed, and so we had to consume that. But I think really one of the biggest challenges that I've been seeing too in this space is not a lot of people are going into this field because they're being like, why would you want to? You're being mandated to do particular things by the state and the feds. You're being underfunded. You're being told that, how to do your job at every turn. And so it's really hard to make sure that we have the staff that we need. So you think about the bus shortage, right? We hear all the time about the bus shortage. We're constantly trying to find more bus drivers and being held up. Our staff gets asked to come and talk at conferences because of the amazing things that we're doing to recruit bus drivers, right? And then you think about teachers and, how do we get more diverse teachers in this field too? And you think, well, why would they ever want to go into this field if they're constantly under attack, constantly having to worry about where is the next, every 2 years, how are we going to be funded? So those things always weigh on my mind. Um, I think some challenges too is that we're seeing more needs across the district in terms of special education, right? Those needs have changed dramatically since COVID. And how do we make sure that we're giving them all the opportunities available and still making sure that the staff feel that they have the resources they need? And, I will say there's probably always more need in that area. And I'm not sure that we could ever fully fill it. But there is a huge increase in special education needs. And the state is not funding us fully for, educating a student with high needs. I'd also say mental health, and that kind of tags along with that, right? Since COVID, we've seen so many more students with mental health needs and even staff too. We got to remember that they're people too. So that's why I'm really passionate about that social emotional programming, and also making sure that we have guidance counselors. And I know that we do a lot with our staff and trying to make sure that they have the resources they need for mental health. But I think those things are some challenges that we're working with. And I'm not sure that people on a day-to-day basis in the community understand the real significant increase in the mental health that we're seeing needs in students since COVID, and then also special education, and then really, in the lack of funding. And so it makes it difficult. You have to be really resourceful and also ask those people that are on the front lines, how can we make this work with the resources that we have, understanding that we may not have the full amount of resources we need.
And then they hope and we wait until we can implement those things.
Yeah, we have been talking as a board in public meetings. And so if people have been paying attention, we've been talking about another levy in November. And, it's really, what are we prioritizing, right? And are we prioritizing public education? And I sure hope that we are. And I think that this levy will, if we are able to vote on it and it passes on Monday night, and it goes to the ballot, I'm really hopeful that the community, understands the importance of what's before us, and that we really need this funding to be able to even keep and maintain what we have right now. And so some of the things that we're talking about right now, there's additional need certainly to meet some of these high needs students and, mental health issues. And so it's really important to have the funding that we need to be able to provide support to our staff and the teachers who are on the front line every day doing this hard work, but the work that they love. And it definitely shows.
Okay, so circling back to the beginning of the conversation, you mentioned your work with the Westerville Education Foundation. Can you give us some insight into what all they do and how they support the district?
Yeah, this is a wonderful organization that's been around for a while, and their mission is to enrich the learning experience and broaden the minds of our students through the funding and support of innovative educational programs. And so, what the Westerville Education Foundation does is fund a lot of those projects that teachers want to do, but we as a district don't really have the funds to do so. So they'll provide small grants to maybe carry out a culture night or to build a fossil garden, or, where the whole community could come in and kind of dig into the garden and find fossils. Or maybe it's some materials for, social emotional learning and things like that. They really provide these essential resources that teachers can use in their classrooms and staff too as well. They also started the Westerville Student Education Foundation, and last year we worked really hard to get it up off the ground. And so that's where students are leading projects in their community service projects. And so there are people within the Westerville Education Foundation that are meeting with these students in the 3 high schools on a regular basis and working with them to put together some sort of project. Maybe it's one collective project across the district or individual building projects, but that really have impact. And so one of them was like book bags for, students during the summer. And so they're doing really wonderful, great work. Emma Nelson's the executive director, and she's done a fabulous job. They also put on Grow and Glow. If you are familiar or heard about Grow and Glow, it was a wonderful event at Minerva Park. I think that was last year that we held it. It feels like it was just yesterday, but also so long ago, where we really highlighted all the great things that are happening across the district. The musical Shrek came in, I think, from Walnut Springs, and there was choirs and band and just booths throughout so people could connect with community resources. So they're doing a wonderful job in really supporting the staff and with funding for these projects that they want to do with their students and in their classrooms that maybe the district just doesn't have the resources to do so.
Oh, that's wonderful. So they are a nonprofit program, and do they receive their funding from individuals in the community, from corporations?
So they're a 501c3 nonprofit, and they do receive funding from businesses. They have the ability to apply for grants, but mostly from businesses, and then individuals like you and me can donate.
Very cool. Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that. Let's see here. What surprised you the most about serving on the board?
I think just to the level of, the amount of things that you don't really understand how things work in a school system. And I think, like I said earlier, being a parent going through the system, you're like, oh, I have a general understanding of how a school district works. But once you get in, you're like, oh, I had no idea. All this stuff happened behind the scenes. It's like a well-oiled machine. So I think that's one of them. And then also, I'm an advocate. I'm pretty sure I was born that way. And in my day job, like in my professional life, I very much so appreciate sunshine laws and open public meeting laws because they're super important because every person should understand how decisions are being made. On the flip side, you're like, oh, we actually can't talk about that, right? We can only talk about that in a board meeting. And so, that was something that was completely different because, I could pick up the phone and call you and say, oh, there's this issue and can we talk about it? But you can't do that with a board member. It has to be in an open setting. And so that was just something that was new for me. Again, I go back to the fact that I'm an advocate and I very much appreciate those laws because otherwise you'd be like, well, how is that decision being made?
Right.
Where did that come from?
Right. Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, I imagine.
Yeah.
Let's see here. What are your strengths that allow you to continue to serve our community effectively?
I would say, something that's always been true to who I am is I love listening to people and how things are working for them, students, family members, staff, and then taking all that in and thinking about it and thinking about, okay, how can we make it better? I absolutely love doing that. And that is, I think, is a through line in everything I do. So I do that in my, my professional career. And so it's something that I enjoy doing on the school board as well. So I've really enjoyed being on the campaign trail again, talking to students and listening to what they love and don't love.
because I have a motto of continual improvement. So how can we continue to do better? I'd also say one of my strengths is really that advocacy. I know Nicole Marshall really pays a lot of attention to our state legislature and what's coming out of the federal and the state, um, and how those policies will impact and the funding will impact our district as well as other people. But something that I noticed that we weren't really doing as a board is talking about that in a forum where the community could really understand it. So I started to take a look at just being true to who I am again, right? Looking at the legislation and how that legislation impacts our school district. And then I would give these reports out during board comments. And as I continued to dig into it more, I realized we really need to be bringing in our legislators. We need them to know what they're voting for or against. At the end of the day, that they are making an informed decision and how they're voting. So started to work with the district leadership to line up these legislative meetings where they would come in and tours and they would understand a little bit more about what we're doing in our district, and what are the challenges. Like, show them the great things, the pathways that we have, what the kids are doing in school these days, because it's so different than when you and I went to school. And then also helping them understand the state budget. And I think we talked a little bit about this too, is that state budgets or school budgets are really complicated. And so making sure they fully understand them. And so one of the things that I did during this biennial state budget, when we started to understand from Nicole how our treasurer, how this would impact our school district, is put my advocacy hat on, right, and start to think about what do we need to do to educate our public? What do we need to do to educate our legislators? And how do we make sure we're fully funded? And so we started to have these conversations about how we would educate the community. And then one of my questions was to our association, can I have a list of all of the school boards across the state? I want to reach out to them. We ended up having to do it on our own, pulling those emails and phone numbers where we could find them. And so I started reaching out to other school districts around the state and asking them, what are they doing to educate their community, sharing with them some materials we put together and saying, please use what you want. If it's helpful, happy to have conversations. And then we, as a Westerville parent, I'm sure you've seen this yourself, right? We started putting out materials to the community. We had a whole website, and we started talking about it a lot at our board meetings so that the whole community could really understand how the state budget is impacting, the potential state budget is impacting our school district. And likewise for the federal government too. I asked if we could pass some resolutions. We sent some resolutions down to the State House and to Congress. And just that piece of really helping people understand how we are being impacted, because we hear a lot about school funding, but I don't think, again, it's so complex, and I didn't fully understand it all until I came onto the board. So I think those pieces, I bring, like really helping the legislature understand, or making sure that they at least know what they're voting for or against, and also helping our community understand how we're being impacted by these state mandates or federal mandates in the budget.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I, as a parent, could see that Westerville was a leader in those efforts, and that was just, made me really proud to be in Westerville, really happy to be here, and excited for what that awareness and education will just bring to my girls going through the school system. So that's wonderful. So we've seen the board navigate really difficult conversations within our community. Tell us how you approach conflict with other community members and why you feel confident in doing so on our community's behalf.
So approach conflict, I try to approach it from a space of empathy and listening. And realize that it has nothing to do with me. It's really the experience of somebody and what they're going through. And so, really trying to listen and listen to understand, and then have conversations, or maybe if it's in a public, meeting, reflecting on it, listening to more people, maybe reaching out to some other people in the district, community members, and really getting a full understanding of the conflict or the impact, and working to understand it from a staff perspective too. And so just really wanting to understand all the sides as much as I possibly can, really with empathy too, and trying to understand where that person's coming from, and realizing it really likely has nothing to do with me.
Yeah, those are great reminders. I've seen this, and you've talked about this a little bit already, but how do you engage with parents in the community to make sure our voices are reflected in the board decisions?
So like I said, I love talking to people. When I'm out and about, happy to always have a conversation. I've had people stop me at the grocery store where I then was like 30 minutes later, like, okay, I'll see you later. Um, Emails, certainly emailing me. And if someone puts their phone number in there, a lot of times I just pick up the phone and call them, because I think a conversation is always really, I prefer conversations rather than just going back and forth over email. Happy to give anybody my phone number if they want to have a chat. Happy to sit down. People have reached out and said, hey, can we sit down and have a conversation? Absolutely. I feel I'm very accessible, and I hope that's true. If anybody ever wants to, have that conversation, they can shoot me an email. They can call me. Um, they can stop me at the store, or I've even talked to people during dinner sometimes. So I feel I'm really approachable. I hope that's true.
It is, in my experience, for sure. Absolutely. And so, speaking of, where can we find you this summer and fall as you campaign? Are there any specific events or happenings that you'll be at?
Yeah, so definitely will be at the Fourth Fridays. I have an orange shirt, so I'm very easy to find. I've been at the farmers market quite a bit too. So if you're there, stop by. Sometimes I put my petitions away or my stuff so I can walk through and pick up some fruits and vegetables and things too. Um, Also, Blendon Township has concerts in the park, so I'll be there. Yeah, and I also am working to hold, and I'll post them on my, my Instagram and on my Facebook page. But I'm going to be holding coffees twice a month. One on a Tuesday morning and one on a Thursday night. Just an opportunity. I'll be up at Java. Opportunity for people to come and drop in and just have a chat. And then, we'll be posting other events up on my Facebook page or my Instagram page.
Yeah, oh, that's wonderful. And so, for those who want to offer support, how can we help your campaign?
So that'd be great. I really appreciate that. First of all, I would say jump on KristyMeyer.com, and that's KRISTYMEYER.com. There's a million ways that you could spell either one of those.
Right.
Um, But, I'd say definitely donate. One of the things that I absolutely hate in terms of campaigning is having to ask people for money to run a campaign. I'd love to ask them for money to be able to give it to the school district, but it is part of the process. So I am asking for donations. I'm shooting for about $15,000. I'm a little over four. So we're still early in that process, and there's more to be done. And that would allow me to buy signs and literature. And then also, if you have some time, I would love for your expertise or whatever you want to do to volunteer. It could be dropping off signs to people. It could be writing a postcard in front of your TV where you're kind of, checking out. It could be just even talking to another community member about me, spreading the word. That's
Mm-hmm.
all really helpful I would greatly appreciate it.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you wanted to be sure that we talked about today?
I just really want to express again how grateful I have been over the past 3.5 years to be able to serve this community, and my gratitude to the staff for the work that they do every day. Um, I'm really excited for our students and their future. And I feel like we work hard as a school district to protect them from what's happening in, terms of funding and state policy, and really make sure that they have an experience where they feel valued, included, seen, and heard. And so I'm just really proud of the work that we do as a district. And that,
Mhm.
when I say we, I mean collectively, like the community, the
Mhm.
staff, and the board.
Well, and to echo off of that, I would just like to offer gratitude for you and our board and our district and everyone. And I think as parents, we see that. It's easy to get lost in the every day and obviously focus on your own family and what we need, but it is not hard to see the effort that you all put into it. And I am, like I said earlier, really proud and really grateful to be part of Westerville. So thank you too. And thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it. And we'll certainly be looking out for you in the community.
Thank you so much, Bethany. I appreciate the opportunity.